When was the last time you stopped at a gas station alone? At night. Think about it. You pull in, you get out. For about 3 minutes, you are standing in a lit-up box of light surrounded by total darkness. Your back to the road, your eyes on the pump numbers. Here's what most people don't know. In 2022 alone, over 45,000 violent crimes were reported at gas stations across the United States. More than 22,000 robberies, just at the pump. That puts gas stations in the top 10 most common locations for violent crime in the entire country. And that's just the crimes that make sense. That doesn't explain the handprint on a Louisiana gas station door, pressed flat against the outside of the glass, in the middle of July, where the print doesn't fog on ice-cold glass. That doesn't explain what 11 people experienced at 11 different stations, from Fort Stockton, Texas, to Carrizozo, New Mexico, to the Seney Stretch in Michigan, and came back unable to fully describe. Before we start, drop it in the comments. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it? I genuinely want to know how many of you are alone right now. Subscribe, hit the bell. This list gets worse before it gets better. Let's go. The legal pad was on the passenger seat when I climbed back in the cab at 3 in the morning. It shouldn't have surprised me. I'd been using it all week to log my hours by hand because the ELD was throwing fault codes and I didn't trust it. What surprised me was the handwriting on the last page. Because the last page had been blank when I stopped, and what was written on it wasn't mine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I've been driving this I-40 corridor since 2007. Elk City to Amarillo, Amarillo to Albuquerque, loop it back, do it again. You learn the pumps the way you learn anything you do 300 times a year. Where the card readers stick, which stations have the big rigs pull-through lanes, which ones have bathrooms that aren't a biohazard situation. The Shell, 4 miles east of Elk City, Oklahoma, is one of the good ones. Decent lighting, a clerk named, or at least named tagged, Darlene, who has worked the overnight shift for as long as I can remember, and pull-through lanes wide enough that I don't have to do a 16-point back and fill in the middle of the night. I pulled in at 2:14 a.m. I know the time exactly because I logged it on the pad. There was a pickup at Pump 4, a Dodge Ram, older model, the dark red that reads almost black under sodium lights, engine running. No one in it. I noticed because the driver's door was cracked about 2 inches, and the interior light was on, and there was no one in the seat. Somebody's in the store, I figured, left their truck idling. That's a thing people do. I didn't give it a second thought. I pulled the rig into the far pull-through and started the fuel process. The Shell on that stretch has 2 diesel pulls on the far end, both working, and I went through the card authorization while I looked up at the overcast. No stars. That part of the Oklahoma Panhandle gets a particular kind of flat, dark overcast in October. Not stormy, just sealed. Like a lid on something. The fuel was running. I went inside. Darlene was there. She is always there. She's maybe 50. Bottle blonde, drinks about 8 cups of coffee per shift, and she will tell you at length about her grandkids and her garden and her sister's recent knee surgery if you give her any opening at all. I've learned not to give her an opening at 2 a.m. I just need the coffee and the receipt. Cold out, she said. For October, I said. That's the extent of our standard exchange. I poured a 24-ounce dark roast. I paid cash. I didn't look at the pickup through the window because it wasn't my business. I asked about the diesel pump on the north pull-through, whether the card reader was still giving trouble. She said they'd had a tech out Wednesday, and it was fixed now. I was in the store maybe 6 minutes total. When I came out, the fuel was still running. I'd put in a diesel card so it would shut off automatically, and the pickup was still at Pump 4 with the engine running, but the door wasn't cracked anymore. It was closed. I stood there with my coffee for a moment, looking at it. Still no one visible in the cab. I couldn't see well through the tinted rear window. The engine noise had a particular diesel idle sound to it, low and steady. Nothing happened. I went back to my rig, pulled the nozzle, replaced the cap, coiled the hose. Standard stuff. It was when I climbed up into the cab that I noticed the lights inside the station had gone off. Not the exterior lights, just the inside. The glass front of the Shell was dark. Darlene's window was dark. The only light was the canopy overhead and the lit pump islands. That was wrong. The inside is lit all night. That's the whole point of an all-night station. I had my hand on the keys. I was running through reasonable explanations. Power blip. She'd gone to the back. Circuit tripped on the sign lighting but not the register. I was almost satisfied with the circuit-tripped idea when I noticed that the pickup was no longer at pump 4. It was parked across the exit lane. Not in a space, not at a pump, across the exit. Bumper to the concrete divider on one side, passenger side a foot from the air pump housing on the other, blocking the lane completely. My rig will not clear that gap, not even close. There is a second exit on the south end of the lot, a narrower one that feeds back toward the frontage road. I hadn't come in that way. It's tight for a big rig, but it's doable if I take it slow. I turned the key. I've been doing this long enough that my hands do the thinking. Key, mirrors, breathe, think about the geometry. I was executing a slow pull forward to line up for the south exit when something knocked on the passenger window. Not hard, not aggressive. 2 knuckles, unhurried. Like someone returning something you'd dropped. I didn't stop the rig. I kept the wheel turning, kept applying gentle pressure to the fuel, kept my eyes on the pull-forward geometry and not on the window. Whatever was at that window, I had decided in the space of 1 second that I did not want to open it. I did not want to see what was on the other side of it. I did not want to be stopped. The south exit has a broken asphalt lip that bangs the undercarriage if you take it too fast. I took it too fast. The trailer cleared the air pump housing by 8 inches. I watched the mirror, and I got the nose out onto the frontage road and then onto the on-ramp going west. I was at maybe 45 miles an hour, just up to operating speed, when I saw the headlights. They were a quarter mile behind me. No, they were on the on-ramp. Still on the on-ramp, already moving, and whatever was carrying them was not building speed the way a normal vehicle does from a stopped position at a pump island. I hit the CB, channel 19. I gave my position and the mile marker, and I said there was a vehicle behaving erratically on I-40 westbound east of Elk City, and I needed anyone in the area to sound off. I got 2 responses in about 90 seconds. I kept driving. The headlights stayed at a quarter mile for 11 miles. Then they were gone. At the Love's travel stop outside Sayre, I parked in the lot and sat for a while. Then I picked up the legal pad to log the time and the stop. The last page, which I had left blank, had 4 words on it in handwriting that wasn't mine. I recognized the handwriting. I don't know how. I'd never seen it before. I'm not going to write what it said. I'm telling you this because I still drive the I-40. I still stop at that shell. Darlene is still there. She has no memory of the lights going off that night. She says the lights don't go off. The legal pad is in a storage unit in Amarillo. I haven't opened that unit since February. The handprint was on the outside of the glass door, pressed flat and still. And what made it wrong, what made me set down the inventory clipboard and just stand there in the middle of the store at midnight, was that the glass wasn't fogged. You have to understand July on that stretch of US 90 between Morgan City and Patterson, Louisiana. Late July is not a month, it is a condition. The air is 91 degrees at midnight and holds water the way a sponge holds water. When you breathe in, you're drinking. Every cold surface in that station, the glass doors of the drink coolers, the front windows, the chrome on the pumps, sweats constantly, condensation running down in sheets. You can leave a handprint on any cold surface just by touching it. The glass on that front door should have been dripping. The handprint wasn't fogged at all. The palm was pressed hard enough that I could count the individual whorls, and underneath each whorl, the glass was dry. That was the summer I'd been working the overnight shift at the Bayou Texaco for 8 months. I'm going to tell you what happened that night, and then I'm going to tell you what I believe about it now, 3 years later, and you can make of it what you will. My name is Celestine Arsenault. I'm 34 years old and I grew up in Berwick, just west of Morgan City, where the Atchafalaya meets the Gulf Corridor, and the Spanish moss on the live oaks grows so thick the trees look like they're dissolving. My family has been in that part of Louisiana since the Acadian dispersal, which is a polite way of saying since the British kicked us out of Nova Scotia in 1755, and we ended up in Bayou country because no one else wanted it. We have a relationship with that land that I am not going to try to explain to someone from outside it. The land is complicated. The dead are complicated. That's just how it is. I took the overnight shift at the Texaco because I was going through a divorce, and I needed income and hours, and I needed to be somewhere that was not my apartment at 3 in the morning. The station sits on the south side of US 90, about 4 miles east of Morgan City, in a stretch of highway where the road surface is only about 8 feet above the water table on a good day. When it rains hard, the parking lot floods knee-deep. During Ida in 2021, the whole lot went under for 6 days. The station has been there in some form since the late 1950s. Before the Texaco franchise, it was an independent place, and before that it was a filling station with a name I've only ever seen on one faded photograph tacked to the back office wall. Broussard Brothers Motor Court and Fuel, established 1953. The photograph shows 3 men in front of a hand-painted sign, squinting in the Louisiana sun. The man on the right is wearing a Texaco star on his shirt pocket, even though Texaco hadn't bought them out yet. He's looking at the camera. His expression is the expression of someone who knows the photo is being taken, but isn't interested in performing for it. I noticed him every time I went to the back office. I never learned his name. The official history of that stretch of US 90 during Hurricane Frederick, September 1979, is that the storm surge pushed about 4 feet of water across the highway for 17 hours. 3 cars were swept off the road. There was 1 fatality in the county attributed to the flooding of the roadway. What I know from local history, from my Aunt Clarice, who was a dispatcher for the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Office in 1979, is that the Texaco station, which had just been the Broussard Brothers station until that March, kept its lights on during the storm. The overnight attendant did not leave. He was found inside after the water receded, sitting in the chair behind the register. He had not drowned. There was no obvious cause of death. He was 31 years old. His name was not in any record I could find. What I know from the rusted Texaco star above the front door, the one that is still bolted there, though it hasn't been on the corporate signage program since the 1990s, is that it swings on dead still nights. It swings when there is no wind. I checked. I stood outside and wetted my finger and held it up, and there was nothing moving. The star swings anyway, just barely. A slow pendulum arc that seems to have a rhythm to it. I noticed the star swinging long before I noticed the handprint. After I found the handprint, I did what you probably would not do. I went outside to look at it from the other side. There was no one at the door. The parking lot was empty except for my Civic and a sedan I didn't recognize parked at the far end by the air pump, which I assumed was someone sleeping. The fog was so thick that the highway was invisible. You could hear the 18-wheelers going by on US 90, but not see their lights. The print on the glass was at chest height, pressed flat, palm and all 5 fingers, the way you'd press your hand against the glass to look through it, which is what confused me when I'd been inside. You press your hand against glass to see through it, which means this person had been trying to see inside the store. I went back inside and stood at the register for a while. At about 12:45, I started seeing the figure in the parking lot. I want to be careful about how I describe this. I am not a person who is given to panic or to fancy. I took a deposition course for 2 semesters before my divorce changed my financial plans, and I know how to describe what I observed without embellishment. The figure was standing in the low spot at the north edge of the lot, where the water always pools. It was the shape of a person, upright, still, wearing what I could distinguish as a short-sleeved work shirt. It was standing in the pooled water. The parking lot lights are sodium, and they're strong enough at that distance to show a reflection in standing water. There was no reflection. I called out twice on the PA. I said we were a 24-hour store, and if they needed assistance, they could come inside. The figure did not move. At 1:19, the intercom on the west wall crackled. This intercom is a pump intercom. It's for customers at the pump island who need to communicate with the register. It hasn't worked in years. The wiring in the back shows a break in it from at least the mid-2000s, based on the corrosion. The intercom crackled, and then a voice came through it, low and even, and said 2 words and a number. The 2 words were a name. I don't know whose name. It wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone I could identify. The number was 1979. The intercom has not crackled since. I tested it myself, cut open the wire housing in the back, found the break, confirmed there is no path for current to travel. The unit is inert. I'm telling you this now because I moved back to Berwick 6 months ago, and I don't work that overnight shift anymore. Not because I'm afraid of what was in that parking lot. I want to be honest about that. I'm not afraid of it. I think whatever was at that station on that night had been trying to communicate something for a very long time, and was using the only medium available to it. A broken intercom, a handprint on glass, the slow oscillation of a rusted star above a door. It wasn't threatening. It was the opposite of threatening. It was insistent. There's something quietly terrible about a presence that simply refuses to be forgotten. The question I keep coming back to, and the one I'll leave with you, is this. What do you do when the thing haunting a place isn't malevolent, when it isn't trying to scare you, isn't trying to pull you under, but is simply, achingly, trying to be remembered? What does it mean that we are the ones who find that frightening? I don't have an answer. The Texaco star is still there. I drove past it last April. It was swinging. I want to start with the photograph because that's the part I've never been able to talk myself out of. I took it with my phone on November 14th at 7:47 p.m., standing at the fuel island of the Marathon station at the western edge of Seney, Michigan, or what passes for the western edge, because Seney doesn't have much of an eastern edge to compare it to. The town is small. The station is the last one before M28 opens up into what locals call the Stretch, which is a 25-mile run of highway with nothing on either side but bog and second-growth spruce, and whatever the bog and the spruce are hiding. I took one photograph. My phone had 3% battery. I had been meaning to plug it in for the last hour and hadn't, which is the kind of small failing that tends to become significant in retrospect. The photograph shows the back of my rental car, an '09 Malibu, the color of old cement, sitting at the pump island. Behind the car, the gravel lot. Behind the lot, the scrubby tree line. And in the tree line, at the left edge of the frame, something that the part of me trained in field identification, that part being a master's program in vertebrate biology, cannot match to any species I have studied. I have looked at this photograph approximately 400 times in the 2 weeks since I took it. The rational reading of it does not improve with repetition. I should explain what I was doing in the Upper Peninsula in November, because it's not the most obvious destination. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 27. I've been in the biology graduate program at the University of Michigan since 2021, working on a dissertation about range expansion in gray wolves in the Great Lakes region. The UP is relevant to this work. I've been up there 5 times in the past 2 years, mostly in summer and fall, doing camera trap surveys and howling surveys, and the general unglamorous fieldwork of being the newest and most expendable member of an underfunded team. I know the landscape reasonably well. I know M28 reasonably well. I know what the Seney stretch looks like in good weather and bad. I did not know what it looked like in the dark, in sleet, with something moving along the edge of the pump lights. I'd pulled into the Marathon at 7:30 p.m. because I needed fuel, and because the sleet had started about 10 miles east, and my wipers were doing their inadequate best. The temperature had dropped 6 degrees in the hour before I stopped. That's the UP's first hard freeze. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives. One moment you're in autumn, the next you're in something else. The station was open. One other vehicle in the lot, a mud-caked F-150 with Schoolcraft County plates, but no one visible inside the truck. I assumed the driver was in the store. I got out, flipped my hood up, ran my card. While the fuel ran, I noticed the tracks. They were in the sleet. Sleet accumulates faster than you'd think, a thin rime of it over the gravel. And in that rime, there were impressions. Not boot tracks, not the 4-point pattern of a dog or a large domestic animal. Something that moved on. I counted the impressions near the pump island. Something that moved in a pattern of about 6 points, irregularly spaced, with a pressure distribution that pushed deeply in the middle and lightly at the outer edges. Like something that was heavier at its center of gravity than at its extremities, and had a lot of extremities. I am a biologist. I have seen a lot of tracks. I stood there looking at these for a while. The pattern circled the pump islands. It had come from the tree line, crossed to the edge of the pump light canopy, circled, and returned. There and back, clearly. The return pass was overlaid on the outbound, which means whatever made them had retraced its steps precisely. Animals don't usually do that. I went inside and paid for the fuel. The clerk was a teenager, 17 or 18, earbuds in, barely looked up. The F-150's owner was not visible. I bought a coffee I didn't want and went back out. The tracks were still there. The sleet was actively filling them but hadn't yet blurred the shapes. And something was moving along the tree line. I want to be precise about this. It was not in the dark. That's the first thing you'd assume. that something was lurking in the woods, in the shadows, in the space beyond the lights. But it wasn't. It was moving along the edge of the light, the boundary, the precise margin where the canopy lights gave out and the darkness began. It was using that boundary, moving parallel to the lot, staying in the gradient, which was, I am a biologist, I need to say this out loud, the behavior of a predator that has learned to use a light-dark boundary as cover. Light on one side, dark on the other, visible from neither. I watched it for maybe 40 seconds. The sleet was in my eyes. I was trying to determine size, gait, shape. The shape was wrong. It was too tall for what I could identify as a quadruped, but its movement wasn't upright. It moved like something that had multiple options for how it could hold itself, and had chosen a configuration I wasn't familiar with. I took the photograph on 3% battery. The phone died immediately after the shutter sound. Whatever was at the tree line stopped moving when my phone flashbulb went off. I got into the car. I drove west on M28 into the stretch. I drove the full 25 miles at 70 miles per hour, which is too fast for that road in those conditions, and I didn't slow down until I hit Shingleton. My field notebook, a standard spiral-bound Avery, water-resistant cover, was in the passenger seat the whole time. I had been using it for 6 weeks of surveys. The last entry I made in it before that night was on November 12th. GPS coordinates of a camera trap on the Driggs River Road outside Germ Farm, routine stuff. When I got to my motel in Munising that night and opened the notebook, there was a new entry. It's on the page after my November 12th entry. It's not dated. The handwriting is not mine. Mine is a cramped left-hand slant. This writing is large, upright, pressured. It covers 3/4 of a page. I'm not going to reproduce the contents here. I'm going to say that the contents describe in detail the survey methodology of my dissertation project. Specific details, including the camera trap placement protocols that I have shared with exactly 2 other people, neither of whom has handwriting that matches this. I'm currently applying for a 2-year research fellowship in the UP. I don't know why I'm doing this. The photograph is on my laptop. I've sent it to 4 people and received 4 different explanations, none of which I find satisfying. The notebook is sitting on my desk at home in Ann Arbor. I haven't opened it past that page. I've been thinking about going back to the marathon station. I keep deciding not to. I keep reconsidering. I don't know what I'd be looking for. I think that's the problem. This is an official customer experience report filed with the Marathon Petroleum Retail Division online portal. Date of filing, April 17, 2024. Reference number 4-17-B. Submitted by Lorraine A. Duca of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Location in question, the Marathon branded station on US 119 southbound, approximately 7 miles north of Hazard, Kentucky. Let's begin with the official details of the incident. On the night of April 16th to the 17th, 2024, I arrived at the station at approximately 3:07 a.m. I departed at approximately 3:49 a.m. Now, I want to note right away that this 42-minute duration does not correspond with my subjective experience of the time inside the building, which I estimated at closer to 15 minutes. For context, I am a retired United States Army military police officer with 22 years of service. I have written approximately 400 incident reports in my professional life. I know how to document what I observed without embellishment. What follows is exactly what I saw. Regarding the circumstances of the stop, I was traveling alone, southbound on US 119, en route to Hazard, Kentucky, to visit my sister who was recovering from surgery. I stopped at this marathon station because I needed to use the restroom facilities. I had been driving since 8 p.m. from Harrisburg. I am 61 years old and have a 7-hour bladder limit, not an 8-hour one. This is relevant context. The station appeared normally operational. All exterior lighting was functioning. The fuel canopy was illuminated, and the "Open 24 Hours" signage was lit. A white Kia Sorento was parked at one of the passenger vehicle fuel pumps, though I did not see the driver of the Sorento at any point during my stop. I parked in the designated customer parking area on the north side of the building. By habit, I noted that the building's exterior dimensions appeared consistent with a mid-size convenience mart, roughly 60 by 40 feet. I went inside. Since then, I have tried to measure the building using satellite imagery. Google Maps satellite view shows the building at approximately 58 by 38 feet. Keep that number in your mind as you listen to the rest of this report. Regarding the description of the incident itself, the interior of the store was staffed by one employee, a heavy-set male in his 20s wearing a marathon polo shirt, stationed behind the front counter. He greeted me when I entered. I asked where the restrooms were, and he directed me to the right, toward a hallway on the north side of the building. I entered the hallway at approximately 3:09 a.m. It was a standard commercial interior corridor, drop ceiling, tile floor, fluorescent lighting. On the right-hand wall, approximately 12 feet from the entry, there was a men's room door. I noted this. I continued forward to the women's room. This is where I want you to pay attention, because what I am about to describe is a structural anomaly that I want documented. I counted my steps. This is a habit from my military service. If you don't know where you are, you count your steps so you know how far you've gone. It was 12 steps to the men's room door. I continued forward. I reached 27 steps before I found the women's room door. At 12 inches per step, that is 27 feet from the hallway entry to the women's room. The building is only 58 feet wide. The hallway entry is on the interior north wall, which means I was traveling parallel to the long axis. At 27 steps, I should have been near the center of the building's width. The women's room door was on the left-hand wall, the exterior north wall. If the women's room is accessible from the exterior north wall at the 27-foot mark, then it should be visible from the parking lot where I left my vehicle. But the exterior north wall of this building, which I examined when I parked, contains only one utility panel, no doors, and no windows. I used the facilities. They were unremarkable. I am aware of how this reads, but I am asking you to consider that I have spent 22 years measuring things. I know when something doesn't add up. Now, regarding my return journey through the hallway, I began my return walk at approximately 3:13 a.m. The hallway on the return was different. I do not mean it was modified. I mean it was different in a way that is difficult to describe while remaining within the conventions of a formal report, but I will try. On the way in, the right-hand wall had one door, the men's room at 12 feet. On the return, walking the same corridor in the reverse direction, the left-hand wall, which would be the right-hand wall on the way in, had two doors. The men's room was at what I estimated to be 15 steps from the women's room. That was slightly different than on the way in, which I attributed to stride variation. But then there was a second door, approximately 22 steps from the women's room. This second door was not there on the way in. I am certain of this. I count my steps. There was one door on the right on my way in. Now there were two. This second door had no signage. It was a hollow-core interior door, painted beige. A small gap at the bottom showed no light from the other side. I stopped in front of it. I stood there for a period of time that I cannot accurately report. My watch, when I looked at it back at the register, said 3:34 a.m. That would mean I stood in that hallway for approximately 21 minutes. I don't believe I stood there for 21 minutes. I believe I stood there for 2. I do not know what happened during those extra 19 minutes. I want to note this clearly. I continued to the store entrance. I purchased a bottle of water and a granola bar. The clerk said nothing unusual. I walked to my car. Once in my car, I found a paper marathon bag from a stop I'd made in Beckley, West Virginia, 4 hours earlier. On the drive to Hazard, I sketched the hallway from memory. The entry, the men's room at 12 steps, the women's room at 27, the route of return, and the two doors. I am not an architect, but I am a person who has read thousands of floor plans. The dimensions on that sketch do not agree with each other. The hallway I drew on the way in and the hallway I drew on the way back cannot both exist inside a 58-foot building. One of them has to be wrong. Or neither of them is the building I was inside. In conclusion, I am requesting that Marathon Corporate conduct a physical inspection of the structural dimensions of this location, specifically the interior hallway leading to the restrooms on the north side of the building. I am requesting confirmation that the building has two doors in that hallway, or one. I am requesting a response to this report. This report was filed on April 17, 2024. As of today, I have not received a response. I didn't open that third door. I'm not sure I could have. I'm going to tell you what happened, and you're going to think I made half of it up. That's fine. I thought the same thing until the third day after. The thing I keep getting stuck on, and I've gone over this maybe 1,000 times, lying in bed at 2 a.m. when I should be studying, sitting in the parking lot before class. The thing I keep getting stuck on is the orange prescription bottle in the cup holder. My roommate's name on the label. Except when I got home, she told me it wasn't hers. She'd never seen it before. She'd been in Dallas all weekend. I don't know whose bottle it was. It was in my car. It came home with me. I still have it. Let me back up. Or try to back up. It doesn't really go in order the way I want it to. US 380 between Roswell and Carrizozo, New Mexico, is about 120 miles. In June, at midnight, it is 94 degrees and completely black, except for the stars, which are a different category of star than you see in El Paso, where I'm from. They're bigger and closer, and there are too many of them in the way that too many of anything starts to feel wrong. I was driving from Roswell back to UTEP, end of a weekend. I'd gone to see a guy I was seeing for about 2 months who lived out there, and we'd had a conversation that ended things, and I was fine. I was in the car. I was going home. That's all I need to say about that part. What I need to say about my state at the time is this. I had not slept well the night before. I'd had 2 glasses of wine with dinner and felt sober by the time I got in the car. It was 11:15 p.m. I had about 3 hours of drive ahead of me. The prescription bottle was in the cup holder when I got in. I assumed it was mine. I don't know what I assumed. I assumed it belonged there. I didn't look at the label until later. I need to stop and tell you. I'm writing this now, sitting in my apartment. It's been 5 days. The bottle is on my desk. The label has a name on it that I don't recognize. I'll come back to this. I stopped at the Phillips 66 in Carrizozo around 1:05 a.m. It's the only lit thing on that stretch. I needed fuel, and I needed to stand somewhere that had a light on, okay? The drive through the dark had been going on for a while, and I'd seen something in the road about 15 miles back that I couldn't identify and had swerved for, and I wanted to stand under a gas station canopy and feel normal for 5 minutes. The town of Carrizozo is small, under 3,000 people. The Phillips 66 is on the south edge of town, where US 380 continues west toward Oscura and the White Sands Missile Range. At 1 a.m. on a Sunday in June, there's nobody there. Except there was someone there. The attendant came out while I was pumping. This does not happen at modern gas stations. It used to happen. Full service stations, you know. They'd come out and check your oil, but that's not a thing anymore. Not at a Phillips 66 in rural New Mexico in the middle of the night. I assumed he needed to tell me something about the pump or the card reader. He was maybe 50, short, broad. He was wearing a Phillips work shirt and he said, in a completely normal tone of voice, "Going to UTEP?" And I said yes, which is the first thing I want you to hold on to. How did he know that? I know, UTEP sticker on my rear window. That's the rational answer, and I've given it to myself 400 times. But then he said, the 380 to 54 is faster than backtracking to 70. And he was right, it is faster. But that's a specific piece of local knowledge about road routing that you wouldn't give an unsolicited stranger at a gas station unless you already knew where they were going. He said, the road gets a little strange past the range. Just stay on the center line. Then he went back inside. I'm telling you this from my apartment 5 days later, and here's what I can't figure out. I've tried to call the Phillips 66 in Carrizozo twice. Both times I got a recording saying the number is not in service. I drove 120 miles out there to look at the pump, and no one could tell me who the overnight attendant was on that shift. The manager I spoke to, a young woman named Destiny, said they don't have an overnight attendant. They're open 24/7, but self-serve after 9 p.m. I took the 380 west, past Oscura, past the long, dark flats of the Jornada del Muerto, the Journey of the Dead, which is what the Spanish called that particular stretch of desert, which in hindsight is not a name you want to be driving through at 1:30 in the morning alone. About 12 miles past Carrizozo, I saw something in the road. I swerved. I always swerve. That's the kind of driver I am. A deer, a piece of debris. I'd rather veer off the shoulder than hit it. I came back onto the road and checked the mirror and there was nothing there. No deer, no roadkill, no debris. The road in the mirror was empty. But I had a clear image of what I'd seen for about half a second before the swerve, and what I'd seen was a person standing in the center lane facing me. Not walking, standing, facing toward my headlights. I did not stop. Here's the thing about the prescription bottle. I looked at the label when I got home. 3:45 a.m., exhausted, sitting in the driveway. The name on it wasn't mine. It was a name I didn't recognize. My roommate, like I said, was in Dallas. She was not home when I got back. When she came home Sunday afternoon, I showed her the bottle, and she picked it up and looked at it and said it wasn't hers. She'd never seen that name. Could have been in my car already? Could it have been there already? I don't know when it got in my car. It wasn't there when I left El Paso on Friday. I'm certain of that because I cleaned out the cup holders specifically. I got home. I made it. I slept for 11 hours. For the first couple days, I told myself reasonable things. I was tired. The drive was long. The guy at the Phillips 66 read my sticker and made a reasonable guess about my route. The thing in the road was a deer that moved fast. The bottle had been in the car longer than I remembered. On the third day, I called the Phillips 66 and got the not in service message, and I stopped telling myself reasonable things. I still have the bottle. It's on my desk. The name on the label, I can see it from here. I don't recognize it. But when I look at it for too long, something at the back of my head goes quiet in a way that feels less like not knowing and more like not wanting to know. I'm not going to say it out loud, the name, not here. If I say it out loud, I think I'll recognize it, and I think that will be worse than not knowing. The road out past Carrizozo, I have not driven it again. The attendant who told me to stay on the center line. I've thought about his face so many times that I can't trust my own memory of it anymore. The bottle is still there. I'm still here. That's what I hold on to. The Suburban killed its lights between the dumpsters, and that was the first thing. Not a flicker, not a dying battery. Deliberate, headlights on, then off, in one clean motion, like someone flipping a switch because they'd arrived exactly where they meant to arrive. It was 10:47 at night, stripes on I-10 near Fort Stockton, and I was standing at the pump watching my card run the authorization hold on the diesel side because I'd pulled up to the wrong pump by accident and was too tired to move the car. The Suburban was a big Chevy, blacked out, tinted windows, black rims, and it rolled slow between the dumpsters and the concrete block wall at the east end of the lot and just stopped. Engine still running, lights off. And that was it. It was just a truck parked weird behind some dumpsters. I told myself that. I finished my pump. I went inside. I want to tell you who I am real quick because it's relevant to why this scared me the way it scared me. My name is Tommy Orozco. I'm 43. I sell industrial filtration equipment out of San Antonio, and I have been driving the I-10 corridor between San Antonio and El Paso for 11 years. That corridor is about 550 miles of West Texas highway that goes through about 4 towns of any size, and a lot of absolutely nothing in between. Fort Stockton sits roughly in the middle, which means it's a fuel stop for every trucker, every road tripper, every border crosser, and every person doing something they'd rather not explain, headed in either direction. I say that not to be dramatic. I say it because I've been stopping at this same stripes for 11 years, and I understand what the normal population looks like at 10:45 p.m. on a March weeknight. I know what weird looks like on that lot. The Suburban parking between the dumpsters and killing its lights was weird. Inside the stripes, I grabbed a 24-ounce Dr. Pepper and a bag of pork rinds. I know. And I stood at the drink station doing the thing you do when you've been driving since noon, which is mostly just existing for a minute before you have to get back in the car. There were 3 other people in the store, 2 guys at the hot food station, trucker types, talking about road conditions on I-10 west of Balmorhea, and a cashier behind the counter, a woman maybe 30, who'd been watching something on her phone with one earbud in. While I was standing at the drink station, another vehicle pulled into the lot. A Peterbilt flatbed, big rig, empty flatbed. It parked on the truck side, far end. Normal. Nothing unusual about it. Happens every 5 minutes at that lot. And then one of the men from the Suburban walked across the lot to the Peterbilt. I could see the lot through the big plate glass windows on the east side of the store. The man from the Suburban, medium height, dark jacket, moving with the kind of purposeful ease that makes him look unhurried, even though he's covering a lot of ground fast, crossed to where the Peterbilt was parked. The Peterbilt driver got out. They did not shake hands. What they did was move a hard-sided cooler from the bed of the Peterbilt to the back of the Suburban. A standard marine cooler, the kind you get at Bass Pro, white with a blue lid, large enough to hold a full case of beer with room left over. The whole transaction took about 90 seconds. Then the Peterbilt driver got back in his cab. The man in the jacket walked back toward the store. I did not move from the drink station. I want to be clear about what I thought in those 90 seconds. I thought, there's a reasonable explanation for this. Ice, medicine, automotive parts, fish. People move coolers at truck stops all the time. I went through every normal explanation I could find and held onto them hard. Because the alternative, the fact that these two vehicles had both arrived within 4 minutes of each other at 10:48 p.m. and done their business in under 90 seconds, and the first vehicle had killed its lights so as not to be visible from the road. The alternative was not something I wanted to be right about. The man in the jacket came into the store. He went straight to the refrigerator case, opened it, took out a Red Bull, closed it, walked to the register, set the Red Bull down, and looked at me. I was looking at my phone, or I was trying to look at my phone. What I was doing was holding my phone at the right angle and moving my eyes across the screen without reading any of it. It took me 3 solid seconds to understand he was looking at me, because I didn't want it to be true. When I understood it was true, I kept looking at my phone. He paid. The cashier gave him his change. He did not take his eyes off me for the entire transaction. The bell over the door jingled. He was gone. Here's the thing about the next hour that I cannot fully explain to someone who hasn't been in that situation. I could not leave. Not physically. No one was preventing me. But the geometry of the thing was that if I went out to my car while that Suburban was still behind those dumpsters, I would be in the parking lot alone with whatever the Suburban contained. And that man who'd looked at me knew that I'd seen what I'd seen. That felt like the worst possible place to be. So I stayed. I bought a coffee I didn't need. I ate the pork rinds slower than I have ever eaten pork rinds. I charged my phone at the in-store charging station, even though it was at 68%. I watched videos on my phone without hearing any of them. The 2 truckers left. The cashier was replaced by a guy who came in for the next shift. And for 53 minutes, I sat in the one chair in that Stripes. They have a single chair at the window, next to a promotional display for beef jerky, and I sat in it, and I waited. At 11:43, the Suburban's lights came on. It backed out from between the dumpsters, rolled slowly to the exit, turned west on I-10. Gone. I waited another 10 minutes. Then I went to my car and got on I-10 east, toward San Antonio, not west. I was checking my mirrors for about 40 miles. At mile marker 276, I pulled into a rest area and sat with the engine on for a while. On the passenger seat, there was a receipt. Not mine. It must have gotten on the seat when I'd put my drink down and shuffled things around at some point. A Stripes register receipt. And on the back of it, in pencil, a column of 7 numbers. No context, no labels, just 7 numbers. I should have left it at the rest area. I put it in my glove box instead, folded small. The receipt is still in there. I check sometimes that it's still there and I don't understand why. I've thought about what was in that cooler a lot, about 90 different times. I still don't know. I'm still not sure I want to. Do you think you'd have stayed in that store, like I did? Or do you think you'd have walked out? Because I've been over that question in my head for 3 years, and I still don't know if I made the right call. I've been planning this drive for longer than I care to admit. My name is Virgil Stokes, and I am 67 years old. When I retired from 31 years in the insurance underwriting business, the first thing my wife said was, "Virgil, go drive 66. You've been talking about it since Carter was president." So I did. Labor Day weekend in September, Tulsa to Amarillo. It is a relatively modest section of the historic route, but one that passes through some of the most genuinely American geography I have ever observed from behind a windshield. The towns along that corridor have a quality that I can only describe as preserved. I do not mean restored, which implies artificiality, but preserved, the way a letter in a sealed box is preserved, holding the shape of what they were, even as the content has shifted. I say all this by way of explaining that I was not in a state of alarm or melancholy or anything other than simple contentment when I pulled into the station just west of Clinton, Oklahoma. It was approximately 6:45 in the evening on September 1st. The station is listed on current maps as a BP. Its signage is recent, the Sunburst logo on a white field, and the pumps are modern Gilbarco units. But at the far western corner of the lot, on a concrete base that is probably original to the property, cracked at the corners and choked with dry September grass, there stands a Conoco sign. It is not a replica. It is an original. The Conoco red and white disc with the raised lettering, standing on a steel post that has gone the color of old blood with rust, leaning about 4 degrees off plumb. Nobody had taken it down. Nobody had tried. I stood at the pump and looked at that sign for a while. The young man who came out to check the exterior trash cans near the pumps was perhaps 22, wearing a BP polo. I asked him about the Conoco sign. He said he didn't know anything about it, that it had been there when he started. I asked how long the station had been a BP. He said he thought it had been different things before his time. I went inside to use the facilities and to pick up a road atlas, because I had forgotten mine, and because buying a road atlas at a gas station on Route 66 is the correct and appropriate thing to do. The restrooms were marked with a hand-lettered sign that said, "Restrooms," with an arrow pointing down a short hallway on the left side of the store. I followed it. The hallway ended not at a restroom, but at a door propped open with a cinder block. Through the door was a room. I understand that gas stations frequently have back storage rooms. I understand that what I am about to describe may have a perfectly ordinary explanation involving building codes and commercial storage regulations. I am simply going to tell you what I observed. The room was furnished. It was not storage furnished with shelving units and cardboard boxes and the detritus of commercial inventory. It was furnished in the manner of a small workplace, a wooden desk, the kind with a single center drawer and 2 side drawers, sitting against the far wall. There was an office chair behind it, the wheeled kind, the vinyl cracked and repaired with electrical tape. There was a pegboard on the wall to my right with a row of hooks, 3 of which held automotive tools, a socket wrench, a tire gauge, and a funnel. The desk surface was clear except for a glass ashtray, clean, and a road map. The air in the room smelled of cigarette smoke and motor oil, which is the particular smell of a working garage from 40 or 50 years ago, not a smell that lingers in an unused room. I stood in the doorway for a moment, making sense of it. Then I noticed the man. He was seated at the desk. I had not registered him at first, which seems impossible given that the room was not large and he was directly in my sight line. But I had not. He was wearing gray coveralls with a Conoco patch on the breast pocket. He appeared to be between 50 and 60 years of age, with a wide, plain face and gray hair cut close at the sides. He was looking at me. He was not startled to see me. He did not speak. He simply looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as expectant, as though he had been waiting for something and was not entirely sure I was it, but was willing to wait a moment more to see. I said, "I beg your pardon, I'm looking for the men's room." He did not respond. He continued to look at me. Then slowly, he turned his head and looked toward the room's single window, a small pane of glass set high on the south wall, the kind that cranks open from the top. I looked at the window. Through it, at an angle, I could see the front of the lot, the pump islands, the road, and headlights. A vehicle sitting on the road in front of the lot, engine running, headlights on, not pulling in, just sitting. When I turned back, the man was gone. I went to the window and stood on my toes to see out. The vehicle was still there, an older model station wagon, I think, though the light was poor, and then it pulled forward and was gone. The road was empty. I found the restrooms at the end of another short hallway I had missed the first time. The road map on the desk was still there when I came back through. It was a 1962 Conoco road map, the cover showing a family waving from a convertible. It was price stickered at 35 cents. I picked it up. It seemed wrong to leave it there. I told the young man at the register about the back room when I paid for the road atlas. He looked at me with the particular expression that young people sometimes use for old men who are saying something inconvenient. "There's no back room on that side," he said. "Just a hallway to the bathrooms." I described the cinder block, the desk, the Conoco man in the coveralls. He said the door at the end of that hallway was a utility closet. He said it was always locked. He was not rude about it. He simply said it in the way of someone stating a known fact. I walked back down the hallway. The door at the end was not propped open with a cinder block. It was closed, with a padlock through a hasp, a heavy padlock, the kind that shows its age in the striations of the shackle, rust-flecked and solid. The clerk, when I returned and asked, said the padlock had been there since before he started. He thought maybe since before the station changed brands. I drove west on the old 66 alignment, the narrow two-lane that runs parallel to Interstate 40, in the last of the September light. About 2 miles west of the station, there is a small Conoco historical marker on the right shoulder, a brown sign, the kind the state puts up for points of historic interest, noting that the Conoco Oil Company maintained a network of stations along this corridor during the Route 66 era. Below the text, there is a photograph, reproduced in black and white on weather-treated metal. 3 men, the station behind them, the Conoco sign visible above the door. The man in the road map photograph at the Conoco historical marker 2 miles west looks exactly like him. I was standing in the parking lot of an Exxon in Allendale, South Carolina, recording myself on my phone when my phone rang. The number on the screen was my own. I want to describe that sensation accurately. You are standing in the cold at 12:30 in the morning, recording your own voice so that you can play it back and confirm that it sounds like yourself. And then your phone rings, and the caller ID shows your own name and your own number. The recording stops. You look at the screen for one full ring, and then you press decline. The voicemail came through 17 seconds later. That is where this story begins. But let me go backward a little, because you need to understand why I was recording myself in a parking lot at midnight, and what had already happened to make that seem like a reasonable thing to do. I'm a travel nurse. ICU. I've been doing it since 2018, taking 13-week contracts at hospitals around the Southeast, which means I put about 40,000 miles a year on my car driving between assignments. The drive from Baton Rouge, Louisiana to Birmingham, Alabama is roughly 5.5 hours. I've done it 4 times. It goes through Mississippi and then through the lower corner of Alabama, or, if you take Highway 278 through South Carolina the way my GPS sent me that night, it goes through a part of the country that is genuinely, beautifully empty, in a way that doesn't feel threatening until you realize your phone signal has been 2 bars for the last hour and a half. I stopped at the Exxon in Allendale for fuel and coffee. The wind was significant, a February cold front pushing through, the kind that makes the gas station canopy creak, that makes loose trash cartwheel across the lot. And when I got out of the car, I had to brace against it. The pump was on the north side of the station, in the full path of the wind, and I stood there with my chin tucked and watched the numbers. While I was watching the numbers, I had the first one, not the phone, the first experience, which was, I heard my own voice, not from the phone, not from a speaker, from the south side of the canopy, as though someone were standing in the shadow at the far end of the pump island, out of sight, having a conversation, and the voice was mine. The exact pitch and cadence, the particular rhythm of my speech, the way I clip my consonants, something I know about myself and other people usually don't notice. It was speaking, but too low to make out the words. I walked around the canopy, no one there. I went inside, paid, got the coffee. On my way back out, I heard it again, closer this time, still from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. Still my voice, still that low-tone, unintelligible cadence. I got to my car. I locked the door. I sat for about 60 seconds, thinking about whether I was losing my mind and whether this was a sleep deprivation issue. I'd worked a 10-hour shift the day before, and then I decided that the best way to assess whether I was having some kind of auditory hallucination was to record myself talking and play it back, because if the voice in the parking lot wasn't mine, I'd be able to tell by comparison. That's why I was outside with the recorder going. That's why I was in the parking lot. And that is when my phone rang, with my own number. Here is the voicemail I received at 12:31 a.m. from my own number. Hey, it's me. I just wanted to check in. I know the drive is long. The 278 through South Carolina, the wind's pretty bad tonight, right? You should probably get back on the road. Birmingham's still a ways off, and you don't want to be late for the shift orientation. Drive safe. I'll talk to you soon. I have played this voicemail approximately 40 times. Here is what is wrong with it. The orientation for my new contract was not the next morning. It was 2 days later. I had not told anyone when my orientation was. I had booked the contract through a staffing agency whose admin team was off for the weekend. The only person who knew my orientation schedule was me. The voice is mine. I've played it for 2 people I trust. One of them said she thought it sounded slightly off. Not the words, but the spaces between the words. The other said she couldn't hear the difference. I stood in the parking lot and called 911. I explained that I had received a phone call from my own number. The dispatcher was patient with me. She asked if I wanted an officer to check the area. I said yes. While I was on the phone with 911, the second voicemail arrived. The second voicemail came through at 12:39 a.m. from my own number. Sorry, I didn't answer. I was on the phone with dispatch. The wind here is something. The officer who comes, Deputy Holt, I think, he's going to check the south end of the lot first. He won't find anything. You should probably be back in the car by the time he arrives. The thing about Allendale in February is there's nowhere for anything to be except right where you are. Deputy Holt's name was on his badge when he got there 8 minutes later. I had not given his name to the dispatcher. The dispatcher later confirmed she had not spoken it during our call. He found nothing in the lot. He was professional and not unkind, and he clearly thought I was either confused or frightened and was being polite about it. He asked if I needed assistance. I said I didn't. He left. The third voicemail arrived while his cruiser was still visible on Highway 278. The third voicemail came through at 12:54 a.m. from my own number. I'm not going to keep calling. I just wanted you to know that I've heard you. All the things you say when you're alone in the car, the things you say to yourself to get through the long stretches. I know the name you use when you talk to yourself, not your given name, the other one. I have a name I use internally, not as a nickname, not as anything I've said aloud to any person on this earth. It is a name I give myself in my own head during difficult moments, something from childhood. Something private in a way that language barely covers. That voicemail knows it. It doesn't say it. It references it. And somehow that's worse. If it had said the name outright, I could have, I don't know, written it off. But it references it. The way you reference something between people who already know. And that means whatever made these voicemails has been close enough to hear something I have never put outside my own skull. The police report is filed. The phone company confirmed the calls originated from my device, while my device was in my hand. They described this as a billing anomaly. They offered me a credit toward next month's plan. I drive the 278 corridor sometimes, on assignment rotations. I have stopped at that Exxon since. It's just an Exxon. The pump works, the coffee's decent, but I still check my own voice sometimes. I play back a voice memo, listen to it, and make sure it sounds right. I make sure the spaces between my words sound like mine. So far, they do. My name is Dennis Allen Larson. I'm 45 years old, and I've been driving US 2 between International Falls and Duluth for 11 years. What I'm about to describe happened on 3 separate nights in January, and the receipts are sitting on my kitchen table right now. I want to start with the receipts, because they're the part I can prove. Everything else, the memory gaps, the stuff about the clerk, what I saw in the rearview mirror on the third night, that's the part where I understand if you don't believe me. But the receipts are physical objects. I have them. They're identical. Not similar, identical. The transaction ID was 2981-KK-04471. The time was exactly 3 a.m. The amount was $83.47. The fuel was diesel, 22.3 gallons. And the location was the Holiday Station store on US 2 in Black Duck, Minnesota. 3 receipts. Same numbers on every field. On January 9th, January 16th, and January 23rd. I'm telling you the receipts first because if I tell you the nights first, you'll decide I'm confused before you hear the part that can't be explained away. The Holiday in Black Duck is a standard small-town Minnesota gas station, the kind that has a hot deli case with burritos and egg rolls under heat lamps, and a coffee station that gets way more traffic in January than July because nothing motivates a man to pay $4 for coffee like a temperature of -17 outside. I've stopped there probably 100 times in 11 years. I know the layout. I know which pump has the sticky card reader. I know that the bathroom key is attached to a piece of a windshield wiper blade. On January 9th, I stopped at approximately 3 in the morning on the International Falls run. Standard fuel stop, same as always. The clerk on duty was a person I hadn't seen before, a young woman, maybe 26, dark hair, wearing a holiday polo shirt that was a half size too big for her. She said, "Cold one," when I came in. I said, "Cold one." I got my coffee. I paid. I pulled my diesel receipt from the pump printout. That is what I remember of January 9th. Here is the gap. I have no memory of leaving the parking lot. I have a memory of being at the pump, collecting my receipt, and coiling the hose. And then I have a memory of being on US 2 westbound, 4 miles past Black Duck, my headlights cutting into the whiteout conditions. The 4 miles between the pump island and that westbound point is a gap. I assumed I was tired. I've driven tired before. You can operate a rig on about 40% of your brain without realizing it. I drove to International Falls, made my delivery, and came back. I didn't think about the gap until January 16th. On January 16th, I stopped at the Holiday at approximately 3 in the morning. The same clerk was on duty. Same dark hair, same oversized polo. She said, "Cold one," when I came in. I said, "Cold one." I got my coffee from the same station. I paid. I pulled my receipt. And here is where it starts to matter. As I was walking toward the door, coffee in hand, the clerk said, "You forgot your card last week." I turned around. She was holding out a card, a fuel card, my company's fleet card, the one I'd used to pay. She said she'd kept it at the register because she figured I'd be back. I checked my wallet. My fleet card was in my wallet. "That's not mine," I said. "I've got mine." She looked at the card. Then she looked at me. She set the card on the counter and didn't say anything else. I left, 4 miles west of Black Duck. Gap. Nothing until I hit Kelleher. 2 receipts, 2 gaps, identical transactions. I called the Holiday corporate line on January 17th and asked if there was a way to verify my transaction history. The person I spoke to confirmed that a fleet card registered to my company had been used at that location on January 9th at 3 a.m. for exactly 22.3 gallons, for exactly $83.47. My card was in my wallet on January 16th. It had been in my wallet continuously since before January 9th. I know this because I use it every day. January 23rd, Holiday, US 2, 3 in the morning. Same clerk, same polo. She said "cold one" when I came in. I did not say "cold one." I stood inside the door and looked at her for a long moment. Then I walked to the coffee station and poured my cup. I paid with cash. I'd brought cash specifically for this stop. When I turned to go, I looked at her name tag. I've thought a lot about whether to write this down, because writing it down makes it real in a way that having it only in my head does not. Her name tag said Dennis. Not her name. My name. My first name. I said, "What does your name tag say?" She looked down at it. She said, without any change of expression, "I don't know. They gave it to me at the start of the shift." I went out to my rig. I drove west on US 2 into the whiteout. 4 miles out of Black Duck, I checked my mirror. This is the part I've gone back and forth on whether to include, because it's the part that sounds the most like something a tired man might imagine. The Holiday station was dark. It was not closed dark. It wasn't just turned off the inside lights dark. It was dark in the way that a building that has been empty for years is dark. The windows were boarded with plywood. The canopy was unlit. The pump islands were dark. The signage was off. I slowed to 40. I watched it in my mirror for about 10 seconds. Then a truck going the opposite direction passed me, and when I looked back, there was nothing to see, just the dark and the whiteout and the road. I drove to International Falls. I made my delivery. I came home. On my kitchen table, 3 receipts. Same transaction ID on all 3. Same time, same amount. No variation of any kind on any field. You could argue that I stopped at the same time every week and bought the same amount of fuel. You could argue that the transaction ID reuse is a database error. You could argue that the dark building was a different building, farther down the road, that I mistook for the Holiday. You could argue all of it. I've argued all of it. The 3 receipts are identical down to the transaction ID. 3 weeks have passed since that night. The ring is on the kitchen table. I left it on the pump island. I'm certain of this. I set it down on the concrete island next to the number plate on pump 3, and I got into my uncle's truck, and I drove away, and I did not touch it again. I watched it get smaller in the side mirror until the road curved and it was gone. Now it's back on the kitchen table. My uncle hasn't touched it. He's been sick for 3 weeks and he doesn't come out of his room much. My grandmother told me not to touch it either, once she understood what it was. She told me what to do about it, and I did those things, but the ring is still on the table. I'm writing this because I want someone outside my family to know what happened, someone who doesn't already have opinions about what it means. To understand how it got there, I have to go back to the night it started. The Texaco on US 160 near Tuba City is where my uncle goes for fuel because it's the closest station to where we live, and because it's run by people he knows, or knows adjacent to. It was a Monday in August, after midnight, and I was with him because he'd asked me to drive his truck back while he caught a ride west with someone from Mo and Kopi, and I was waiting while he handled that. Monsoon season in the Arizona high desert doesn't look like what people from outside think rain looks like. It comes sideways in walls. The lightning out on the painted desert flattens everything. It's so bright for half a second that you see the mesa profiles in perfect silhouette, the whole landscape printed in black and white, and then it's dark again. That night was one of those nights. The lightning was constant, the thunder was close, and I was standing at the pump island of the Texaco while the truck finished fueling. The air filter box on my uncle's truck has a bad seal. This is a known thing. The engine's fine, but the seal on the box is cracked, and the lid doesn't sit flush, and over the winter, road debris gets into it. My uncle asks me to check it when I drive the truck, just to see if anything needs to be pulled out. I popped the hood. I lifted the air filter box lid. Inside, resting against the filter, was a ring, turquoise and silver, the kind of work that takes real skill. The silver is wired in 3 strands, wrapped and crimped, with the turquoise cabochon set in a bezel that fits it exactly. Old work. It wasn't dirty from the road. It wasn't corroded or dusty the way something gets after months in an engine box. It looked like it had been placed there recently, carefully. I held it up, turning it. In the lightning, I could see the silver wires clearly. 2 strands wound the way you'd expect. The 3rd strand wound in the opposite direction. That is when the lightning snapped, and I looked up, and I saw the figure in the field across US 160. Looking back at things now, 3 weeks later, my uncle started being sick 3 days after that night. He has a doctor. The doctor says his tests don't show anything specific, which is the kind of answer that means they haven't found it yet. Not that it isn't there. He says he's tired in a way that sleep doesn't help. He doesn't eat much. My grandmother, she grew up in the area east of Tuba City. She knows things I don't, and things she's chosen not to tell me. When I described the ring to her, her expression changed. She didn't touch it. She told me to put it in a cloth. She told me not to wear it, not to let it touch any of our things. She told me to take it back to where I found it and leave it there. I did that. I drove to the Texaco on a Thursday morning, and I put the cloth on the pump island, and I unwrapped it, and I put the ring down, and I drove away. Yet the ring is still on the kitchen table. Going back to that night, the figure in the field was standing perfectly still. US 160 was between me and it. In the monsoon rain and the lightning, I could see it was tall, taller than a person, but upright in a way that read as a person. It was at the fence line on the far side of the highway, maybe 150 feet away. The lightning came again. It had moved. It wasn't toward me, but it had moved. It was now at the fence post closest to the highway, another 40 feet closer. The truck's engine was running. The fuel handle had clicked off. The tank was full. I needed to replace the nozzle and get in the car. I did not want to look away from the fence line to do it. I also did not want to keep looking. I replaced the nozzle. I lowered the hood. I still had the ring in my left hand. I needed my right to lower the hood latch. I got in the truck. I started moving before the door was fully closed. The truck barely turned over. The engine caught on the 3rd attempt. That is a thing about my uncle's truck that is not normally true. It starts on the first try. Always. In the side mirror, through the rain, I watched the pump island get smaller. At some point, I couldn't see the fence line anymore. I don't know if the figure was still at the fence or if it had moved again. I drove home with the ring in my left hand, closed in my fist, because I didn't want it rolling around loose in the cab. Since then, I've looked for similar reports. I haven't found anything specific enough to feel like evidence. The ring is documented. I have photographs of it that I've sent to 2 people who know about traditional Dene silverwork. One of them told me the technique is old, the reverse wound strand is deliberate, and the piece shouldn't have been in an engine box. He didn't say anything else. He didn't answer my follow-up questions. My uncle is still sick. The ring is on the table. I'm asking, if you're reading this, if you've driven the US 160 corridor, if you've stopped at stations near Tuba City or Cameron, or anywhere out in the eastern reservation land, I need to know if anyone else has found something like this. Not the same thing, anything like this. I need to know I'm not the only one. I don't know who I'm talking to. Maybe that's fine. Maybe that's the point. I've been trying to say this to someone for 3 weeks, and every time I open my mouth to someone real, my sister in Gdansk, the priest at the church in Havre I sometimes went to during the sugar beet season, every time I try, the words don't come. It is not because I can't find them. It is because I understand that once I say them to a person who knows me, I become someone who said this, and I don't know if I'm ready to be that. So I'm saying it here, into nothing, or into whatever you are. The Senex on US 2, just east of the bypass, is where I stopped every morning during harvest. 5 a.m., still full dark in late October, that hard Montana frost that turns the ground white and makes your breath a thing you can see. I'd been making this stop for 3 seasons, the same teenage kid working overnight, the same terrible coffee in the paper cups with the Senex logo, and the same drive out to the fields after. That morning, October 24th, was my last week of the season. 1 more week of harvest, and then I had enough to go home. Home is Wrocław. Well, near Wrocław, a town you haven't heard of. I'd been in Montana since April, 7 months. I was tired in the bone-tired way that 7 months of seasonal labor produces, which is different from regular tiredness. It doesn't go away with sleep. It accumulates. I pulled up to the Senex at 5 in the morning. It was still dark. It is always still dark at 5 in October in Havre, which sits at 48 degrees north latitude, which means in October you get maybe 9 hours of light, and the rest is that particular northern nothing. I ran my card. The pump authorized. I squeezed the handle. And that is when it happened. And I have never figured out how to say what it was. The ground felt wrong. I know how that sounds. The ground, the concrete forecourt, the pump island under my feet, didn't shake, didn't crack, didn't do anything visible. It just felt wrong in the way that something feels wrong when it is not what it appears to be. Like if you pushed on a wall, and instead of resistance you got a slight, wrongful give, and you understood all at once that the wall was not solid, had never been solid, had only been presenting as solid. The concrete under the Senex forecourt presented as solid. It had never been solid. What was under it? I'm not going to claim I know what was under it. I'm going to tell you what I felt, and you can decide what it means. What I felt was size. It was not the size of a thing, but the size of a presence. Something enormous. Enormous not in the way an animal is enormous, but in the way a weather system is enormous. In the way that something enormous doesn't have edges you can find. It was below the concrete, and it extended outward in all directions, farther than I could feel the extension ending. It had been there for a long time. It was not there in the way a person is there, conscious and attending. It was there the way a mountain is there, present, complete, and not interested in being present. And then, for one moment, it was interested. Not in me. I need to be clear. Not in me specifically. Not in Irina Kowalczyk from near Wrocław, 38 years old in October, standing at a Senex pump at 5 in the morning. The interest was not specific. It was the way something very large becomes briefly aware of something very small. The way you might register a gnat landing on your arm and then forget it. The awareness was complete for 1 second, and then it was gone. But in that second, this is the part I can't say to the priest, because the priest would have answers for it that I don't think are right. In that 1 second, I understood something. I don't have words for it, not in Polish, not in English. It was the kind of understanding that bypasses language entirely, that arrives not as a sentence, but as a state. What I can say is this. It was about scale. It was about how small the things I'd been afraid of were. It was about how small everything I had ever worried about was relative to what was under that forecourt. This should have been comforting. I think it was supposed to be comforting. But it was the most frightening thing I have ever experienced. When the pump clicked off, I don't know how many minutes had passed. The receipt printed. I stood there for a while. The rosary I always keep in my jacket pocket. I'd bought it at the Jasna Gora shrine in Częstochowa before I left Poland in 2021. 59 red glass beads on a silver chain with a silver cross. I'd touched it in my pocket every morning at the Senex, a habit. I pulled it out now. There were 58 red beads, and 1 white bead, in the middle of the second decade. I had bought 59 red beads. I had touched 59 red beads every morning for 3 years. I know what I bought. I know what color they were. I put the rosary in the paper bag with my coffee cup receipt, and I threw the bag in the dumpster by the air pump. I don't know why. It seemed like the right thing to do. I worked the last week of the harvest. I earned my money. I did what I came to do. I'm going to Poland at the end of November. I have my ticket. I am not coming back for the next season, which I've been doing since 2019, which has been half my adult working life. I'm not sure what I'll do instead. I have family. I have people who know me and a place that knows my name. What I keep thinking about, what I can't stop thinking about, is whether the thing under the Cenex forecourt is still there, whether it's there under every forecourt, whether it registered me at all, or whether I'm the gnat who thinks about the arm. I think I'm the gnat. I think going home is right. I think being somewhere that is full of people who have known me for a long time is the correct response to understanding how small I am. I don't know if I'll find, when I get there, what I left behind. That's all. That's what I wanted to say.